I'm going to
Ooh,
take us to the Minnesota Timberwolves, who we both hit the over on them this year, right?
we did.
So they are good. They beat the Celtics, they beat the Nuggets, and I did not watch the Nuggets game, but it's become pretty clear. People in Discord were talking about it. They are giving Denver just defensive problems by saying, "Hey, we're going to park like Karl-Anthony Towns will be on Jokic, and then we'll have Rudy Gobert on the back line, and that's
Yep.
how we'll gum things up." This team, though, is now first in points allowed per possession on the defensive end. Not something that I would have necessarily predicted looking at their roster. Their transition defense, thanks to an apathetic Karl-Anthony Towns, can still be shaky, but it's improved since Jaden McDaniels has come back. They have the league's best half-court defensive rating by a mile. It's not even close right now. They're allowing like 0.81 points in the half court, and the next closest one I believe is the Clippers, and they're allowing like 0.85. They've absolutely killed it there. A big part of that is because Rudy Gobert, I haven't thought about awards, but he's in the defensive player of the year race right now. Like, opponents are scared again when they're getting into the lane, and he's all over the place too. If you're kind of watching him off the ball, some of the teams, like, look, he was on Kristaps for a lot of the Boston game when they were playing out Horford as well, and he's pulled out from the paint, and he's like, the speed. It's just a different player that we've seen this year. Even on offense, I think that he's been better. So I don't know if it's an issue of him being healthier, more comfortable, both. It's a big deal for the Timberwolves. They're no longer fouling like wild, and that's been a big deal. They are getting a little lucky on opponent threes. Opponents are shooting like 32.3% or whatever on threes per cleaning the glass. That's going to go up. But I think that the bigger development is Rudy Gobert. It's also Naz Reid, by the way, incredible at both ends. He has just been, the floor game is still there. He can give you the occasional post up. He's hitting his above the break threes. He's looked really good in basically every single defensive situation that I've seen him in. The rim protection started improving last year. It's held serve for the most part this year. And then Anthony Edwards, we have to talk about. I don't know how to frame it. And we go back to that fourth quarter with the Celtics. The stuff he's doing on defense, and it's for pockets of time, probably because he shoulders so much of a burden on offense. It's special stuff. Like, this is someone who could make an all defense team in any given season. I don't know if he'll ever hold it for a long enough stretch to be mentioned in that. But if the Wolves are going to have the best defense in the league this year, or top three, it'll be Rudy Gobert, and then Jaden McDaniels, depending on, it's just because he hasn't played as much. Anthony Edwards will get residual mention there, but he is, some of the rotations he has made around the baskets, some of the gaps he has shot on closeouts, and then just, we've always known that he can kind of lock down in certain one-on-one situations. We saw him really going after Jaylen Brown, Jason Tatum in that Boston game. I think and this will lead into some concerns with them, the offense has not looked great. Anthony Edwards has been really good, but I do think the dual big setup, it does not allow him to get to the basket as much. And he's kind of needed to offset that by one. He's just hitting a ton of his off the dribble threes. Donovan Mitchell, Jason Tatum, and Luka Doncic are the only players who have hit more off the dribble threes to start the season. Edwards is still shooting 54+% on his drives. I'd probably like to see him take fewer ultra long twos, but he's hit some really tough runners in lieu of the rim stuff. And that's kind of how he's adapted. And he's thrown some really just great nifty kickouts. The live dribble playmaking, I think, is still on the come up. Aside from him, though, and they're like, Naz Reid's been a bright spot, even Rudy Gobert, a lot of the times offensively, the offense is 25th in 3-point attempt rate. They're not getting to the rim nearly enough. This is a team, I know they're not necessarily built for it, but when you have Anthony Edwards and Jaden McDaniels, and even Rudy Gobert and Karl, you can run after getting a defensive rebound. It's not illegal. You can get out and run. So try doing something like that. And maybe this still has a lot to do with the newness. And I do think if they did push the ball a little bit more off the defensive boards, that would address some of the absence of rim pressure here. And then two things is the final notes. I've very much enjoyed seeing Naz Reid, Slow-Mo, and Anthony Edwards play together. They are just and I would like to see the three of them play with Jaden McDaniels more as he's as he's been back longer. They're forcing turnovers like crazy. When those three are on the court, the Timberwolves are forcing turnovers on 20% of opponent possessions, which is just ludicrously high. And the final note here, and maybe the most important note, despite all the good things we're saying, Karl-Anthony Towns has been dog shit to start the season. I'm not making a personal attack at him. I want to see him play really well. I think he can be a fantastic player. but his 3-point volume needs to come up. They need him to be more aggressive, not just launching threes, but going after smaller players. The defensive issues are always going to be there, but he's just like so often caught off balance at like even more than usual. I don't know if something else is wrong there. We're getting to the point where he makes $36 million this year. Who wants to pay him the 4-year, $223 million extension that kicks in next season? And if you're the Wolves, the fact that moving Karl-Anthony Towns might be necessary to help your offense is just mind melting because of he's supposed to be that outlet. And so that's just, I know it's early, but that's what I'm watching, because the path to them becoming appreciably better on offense, just based off how everyone's playing right now, is Karl-Anthony Towns just finds that gear and maintains it, or they're able to find someone who values Karl-Anthony Towns enough to send them players that might help them get there.
Yeah. So I want to talk about that.
I think I just talked for like 80 minutes nonstop.
No, no. And like, as you talked, I was like, well, there goes my point. There goes my point. But I was going to be a little more bearish on Minnesota because that number one defense is it. Like you mentioned the stat, they are lucky in opponent 3-point percentage. That's the third lowest mark in the league. Last year, they were 23rd in that stat. The opponent shot something like 37.3% last year on threes.
Which are fairly, it means they're due.
They're due, right? Exactly. It's fairly well established that that's mostly luck. Some teams tend to do it year over year, but that's pretty iffy. And just to underscore, it's like you led with it. They've beaten Denver and Boston. You know who else has beaten Denver or Boston? Nobody. Minnesota has both of them. But in those games, I have the numbers here because I just like couldn't believe it. Denver shot 18.2% from three in that loss. Not good. Boston shot 28.2% from three. So like that's just illustrative of the fact that the Wolves have mastered phantom 3-point defense, or they've been getting a little lucky. You hit that. I'm not going to belabor it. I think Minnesota's good. We've said it for a while. I think that defense is not going to hot take. The Wolves will not finish with the best defense in the league.
Will they be top 5? With the way Rudy Gobert is playing,
that's the thing, right? They have Rudy Gobert. They have Jaden McDaniels. We all agree. If you watch Anthony Edwards like move around for 5 seconds, you say that guy has the tools to be an incredible defender. So there's 60% of your first unit. You know, Conley knows where to be. He's in his 20 millionth year. So whatever. And Towns is just bad. But top 5 should seem plausible. The Towns thing is the most interesting issue here because as I rewatched the fourth quarter against Boston, and all I could think about was, in addition to, my God, Anthony Edwards is trying to just like take everyone's head off on both ends, is that Towns like is just, and it's mostly situational because you can't put him near the basket because Rudy Gobert's there, and if you put a smaller guy on him, so he can't go post up and exploit a switch that way. Rudy Gobert's there. So now you have a really, really highly paid pick and pop power forward that can't guard anybody. And like, what do you do with this guy? There's this idea I've always had of like, Towns objectively is ridiculously talented. Like he has his early career numbers, stack up against almost anybody in terms of like the 2010 stuff and the 3-point shooting and all this other stuff. But then it's like, is it on Minnesota for putting him in a position where like so many of his skills are marginalized? Or is it that he actually just is not someone that any team should ever pay what he's making? Before Gobert was there was plenty of Towns criticism, and that had more to do with like, can he defend and what happens to him in like high stakes games? Why does he like lose his grip on reality? It's tough because he's stuck. Like if you go trade for Karl-Anthony Towns now, that salary is coming with him. Like there's nothing to do about it. So now everyone's talking about, well, the Wolves can't pay all these guys and you've got to break up your centers and Towns is the most likely guy to be traded. I just wonder if it's going to have to be Gobert because you can't trade Towns because teams are going to see what he's doing and realize like, well, he's not getting better. He's deep enough into his career where he sort of is what he is. We can change his situation. But then if he's our best player, which he should be, if he's making the money he's making, we turn into the Timberwolves of like the late 20 teens and we, make a play-in game once in a while. Like, I think almost by default, the way the Timberwolves get out from the financial quagmire that they're going to be in soon enough is almost maybe not going to be to trade Towns because you sort of like can't do it for positive value.
So my pushback there would be, I think the fact that he's 27 and some of the harbingers are just, oh, he's shooting 26.5% on wide open threes. And even Chris Finch said those shots are eventually going to go in. And having someone with his ball skills and shooting, like that didn't just go away. And we've seen moments of it where he gets ultra aggressive, puts the ball on the deck. I don't know. You pose an interesting question, is there like a John Collinsification of Karl-Anthony Towns here because they've marginalized him with the way John Collins was in Atlanta. However, he's still posting 27 plus usage this year. And the opportunity's there for him to get volume. He needs to be more aggressive with it. So I think this is more, they can probably share the blame. Certainly more. I blame Atlanta for what happened to John Collins. I mean, we're seeing some kind of issues in Utah too, but they also were playing him with, basically two other bigs, in Larry Markkinen and Walker Kessler. I do wonder though, I think more likely than them just deciding to trade Gobert at this point would be, do they pull the John Collins with Karl-Anthony Towns? It's like, we can get back expirings and we just pivot from there. And like, that's the way. I don't think we're there. I want to make clear, Karl-Anthony Towns is really talented. I was trying to figure out how we could get Zach LaVine back to Minnesota in a Karl-Anthony Towns trade, though. I mean, Towns for Zach LaVine would be an interesting challenge trade, but then Chicago still has Vooch. And so you kind of need a third team that would, are you either sending Vooch there, or are you sending Towns somewhere that's going to send you enough stuff to get Zach? Could you imagine Zach LaVine on this team? That would really test their number one defense, by the way.
Yes, it would. And then what? Like, so Edwards and LaVine are your backcourt now? Because
it's it's Conley, Edwards, LaVine, McDaniels, Gobert. Sign me up. You have Kyle Anderson coming off the bench.
Yeah,
Alexander Walker coming off the bench.